Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to today's briefing, where we will cover 4 agenda items. But beforehand, I would like to begin by expressing deepest sentiments of sadness at the recent loss of innocent lives. The barbaric and egregious act by terrorist organizations against the civilian population is greatly condemned. Such acts against fellow Ethiopians are no less than bestial manifestations in their nature, and sometimes words do fail. No human, regardless of the multiple identity groups to which they belong to, should be subjected to such inhumane acts, yet the very face of terrorism manifests in such ways. We understand there is anger. We acknowledge that there is frustration. Yet anger has got dual features. It can be toxic and destructive. And on the other hand, anger can be a catalyst for productivity if channeled appropriately. Therefore, what Ethiopia needs in this moment as a country of 110 million is not to fall for the agenda of organized destructive forces. It requires a silent majority to actively demonstrate unity where Ethiopia's enemies are working actively for discord. It requires heated temperaments to cool down and calmly connect the dots of the greater operating context. And it requires examining the real culprits lurking in the shadows rather than shooting down those most visible and exposed. On this note, the first agenda item for today's briefing is therefore related to the current peace and security issues with the recent attacks by OLF Shane on innocent Ethiopians. The Ethiopian Federal Police is currently undertaking investigations for further details on what transpired and how it transpired. As we know, pockets of the Oromia region where OLF Shane is terrorizing civilians has been under heavy government-led operations in the past months. Particularly following last week's attack, Defense Forces reinforced a response operation against OLF Shane the very next day. While I defer to further details to be shared by the security sector in this regard, it's important to highlight that this is not an isolated incident. It has been purposely designed to foment deep divisions between ethnic Oromos and ethnic Amharas that in unity toppled a TPLF hegemony. It has been purposely designed and communicated in a manner to anger citizens in the Amhara region, while victims of the attacks comprise ethnic Amharas, it comprises ethnic Oromos, and also comprises ethnic Gumus. It has also been purposely designed to anger citizens at a time when the country is leaning straighter towards its development endeavors. There is also undoubtedly a geopolitical underpinning to security threats within the country that are intensified through errand runners locally. The architects of ethnic strife, colluding with their foreign masters, know which strings to pull in the divisive fabric that they were weaving for the past 28 years. Hence, it is imperative to place all these incidents within the context of who thrives by creating instability in Ethiopia. While federal and regional forces continue to take measures against OLF Shane, but also their associates propped up through foreign funds to destabilize the region, is also doing work to enable communities, or the region is also doing work to enable communities to be custodians and drivers of security. Those in need of assistance are, as a direct outcome of these attacks, are currently being supported as well. On this point, I also want you to take note that the National Security Council had set a direction 2 months ago to undertake various rule of law enforcement and terrorism countering measures, and therefore the security sector has been working in accordance. It is the unwavering unity of Ethiopians across the nation that overturned TPLF's ambitions, and it will be the unwavering unity of Ethiopians that will enable thwarting, destabilizing efforts by their associates. This is predicated on Ethiopians in the country and abroad seeing difficult situations for what they really are and pushing back in a united manner against the purposeful amplification of ethnic and religious divisions to weaken the nation. I want to emphasize here that the peace and security remains a key agenda and priority of the government. Detailed security operations against terrorism by its very nature is not a daily publicity item. Hence, the security sector needs to be supported and trusted in delivering on its mission, despite some of the challenges, and it will continue informing the public at different intervals, as it has been doing so in the past months. Moving on to the second agenda, which is the peace agenda. It pertains to the government's announcement of the peace process. One of the agenda items that the Prosperity Party Executive and Central Committees had discussed in recent meetings pertains to the peaceful resolution of the conflict in the northern part of the country. It is not news that the federal government has been very consistent in promoting peace to any political contestations. The posture of the government prior to the start of the conflict has always been one of peace until it was provoked through the attack on the Northern Command of the National Defense Forces. Even though throughout the active combat period, the government has made numerous calls to the TPLF to lay down arms and avoid further bloodshed. So it is with this continued commitment to peace that the ruling party's executive committee had established another committee to explore the prospects of the peaceful resolution of the conflict. As one of the members of the committee, the Minister for Justice, Dr. Gideon, during his briefing on Monday, underlined factors and considerations behind the peace process, and I will quickly share with you some of these. So the first factor is that the Ethiopian government and Ethiopia have always preferred peace and have been forced into the conflict. This is a conflict that has been imposed on the government. The second factor is that peace is essential for our political and economic reform initiatives to succeed. The third factor is the government and Ethiopia would like to put an end to this tragic chapter in our history and move on forward. We aspire to move towards reconstruction, rehabilitation, and reconciliation of communities affected by the conflict. This is further enhancing the efforts that have already been begun in previous months. And also there is a need to avoid further bloodshed and end the suffering and misery occasioned by the conflict. And the fourth factor is that the government would like to foster national consensus through national dialogue. If you recall, in his briefing on Monday, Dr. Gideon had also laid out the principles that are to guide this peace process. The first principle, clear one, is the respect for the constitutional order of Ethiopia. The second one is our fundamental national interests need to be preserved. And then the third one is that the African Union, as the facilitator of the process, is highlighted in accordance with the principles that they will lead this process in accordance with the principles of African solutions to African problems. With that shared on the peace process, let me move on to the third agenda item, which is humanitarian assistance update. As it pertains to the humanitarian assistance being administered to affected communities, in Tigray, between June 18th, 2022 to June 21st, 2022, we've had 20,336 metric tons of food, 1,775 metric tons of non-food items, above or close to 159,000 liters of fuel, 57 million Ethiopian birr, 15.48 metric tons of medicine that have been dispatched to Mekelle on 488 trucks, of which so far only 283 have returned thus far. I recognize that earlier this morning, His Excellency Leggese Tullu, Minister with the Government Communication Agency, had provided a humanitarian update in his briefing, but it's also important to note that my update is contained within assistance provided in the past month. His was a little bit broader in the time frame. So when you're reporting, there may be discrepancies, numerical discrepancies in number, but this is considering the period that each of us have focused to share. So in the same period that I have shared with you earlier in Afar, for this about 1 month period, 1,798 metric tons of food and 742 non-food item kits have been delivered as humanitarian assistance. And in the Amhara region, 1,979 metric tons of food have also been delivered. In relation to humanitarian assistance, I think it's really critical to debunk the erroneous information about fuel being a case for the closure of Mekelle Airport. And to substantiate this, we had requested the type of aircraft that is being deployed by humanitarian partners for the Tigray operation. And I have data which confirms 3 types of aircrafts that are being utilized. The first one is DCH 8402, deployed by the WFP. It's usually the fuel required for it is about 2,500 liters, and the amount of fuel required for the round trip is filled at Addis Ababa. The second type of aircraft utilized is a B737-244. This is a cargo type of aircraft deployed by WFP again. The type of fuel required for this aircraft to operate is 10,000 liters, and the amount of fuel required for the round trip is fueled at Addis Ababa again. The third type of aircraft being utilized is the Dash 8, and this is deployed by ICRC. The required amount of fuel that they need to operate this aircraft is 1,800 liters, and the amount of fuel for this aircraft as well is the round trip is filled at Addis Ababa, so there is no refueling requirement on the other end. Moving to the last briefing point for today, I want to draw your attention to green legacy and agricultural activities. So as we know, climate change is an enormous global threat, and Ethiopia is highly affected with extreme land degradation, droughts, floods, biodiversity loss, and other factors as well. On June 21st, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, in the presence of federal and regional government officials, as well as the diplomatic corps, launched the 4th Green Legacy season. This marks the final of the 4-year national challenge to plant 20 billion seedlings in 4 years. So just the 4-year period, but it doesn't mean that Ethiopia is going to conclude the habit that it has been able, or the culture that it has developed over the past 4 years. In relation to this, there seems to be an erroneous perception that by promoting green legacy and agricultural endeavors, that the government is uninterested in addressing security challenges and mourning the loss of lives. Such perceptions are skewed and purposely misleading. As I had shared with you earlier already, peace and security continues to be a primary priority of the government, while destabilizing Ethiopia continues to be a primary priority of enemy forces working in an orchestrated and coordinated manner. Their ambition and intention is that Ethiopians are always in constant animosity and strife towards each other, and therefore will let development efforts slip away. But for Ethiopians, that is not an option. With a growing population, the government is also quite fixed and focused in ensuring development endeavors progress unhindered, and therefore Green Legacy is one of the many national development endeavors. One of the key successes of the Green Legacy initiative has been instrumental in mobilizing millions of people and creating public awareness, thereby leading to significant decline in the rate of deforestation over the past couple of years. So this is a huge cultural shift in how the population at large is viewing a green environment. Just to give you some data, the proliferation of more than 120,000 nursery sites throughout the country has enabled job creation for various sections of society. Resultantly, over 183,000 permanent and temporary jobs have been created as a direct outcome of the greening endeavors, per data received from the Ministry of Agriculture, and this has generated an estimated 1.3 billion Ethiopian birr in income and wages. So you can imagine the impact of these jobs on households at the household level throughout the country. In addition, an annually improving survival rate of around 80% is contributing to the creation of new forests. Of this year's seedlings prepared for planting, 52% account for agroforestry trees. Forestry trees, on the other hand, account for 47% of seedlings prepared, and the remaining are ornamental trees. So this data that I'm providing to you is to reiterate that Green Legacy need not be viewed simply as a mere tree planting exercise. It has to be understood in the context of what it means currently and for coming generations. Therefore, even the motto for this year, the 4th year and the conclusive year, has been entitled Planting Our Generational Legacy. The focus on high-value plants like avocado, papaya, and bamboo contributes towards economic gain and increased commercialization. And as we've seen, avocado exports have been made over the past year, and also exports expected to boost as the Green Legacy initiative itself matures. Hence, the foreign currency earning potential of Green Legacy is also an attribute, another key attribute to note at the national level. So we should all be cognizant that full efforts by all stakeholders in this rainy season will yield greater results towards national productivity endeavors, particularly with global supply chain disruptions and related increases in cost of basic commodities as well. So this is also in tandem with agriculture activities that are going to be amped up during this rainy season. In concluding, you would all recall that government efforts championed by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed for wheat self-sufficiency began a couple of years ago. And it's the fruits of this labor that we are witnessing in wheat harvest successes as of recent, as wheat supply chains have been disrupted globally due to the Ukraine and Russia conflict. Hence, we should not discount these agricultural efforts that are being undertaken by the country, as well as the green legacy efforts. So with these briefing points for today, I will open it up to key issues that you have. Okay, so we'll start from here, and we'll go there. Let's wait for the microphone, please.
The first one was, you talked about those who are fueling ethnic divisions in Ethiopia and their foreign masters. Can you tell us a bit, or being more specific, who are the foreign masters you're talking about, and what are the interests they have in fueling ethnic divisions in Ethiopia? My second question is about peace. You talked about the AU mediation and the AU-led negotiations. TPLF have already said that they want to stick to what they call a pre-existing agreement to have talks in Nairobi on the Uhuru Kenyatta lead. What do you have to say to that? First, can you confirm or deny there was a pre-existing agreement?
Sorry, I didn't hear your last question. We start again, it's not clear.
Sorry, the last question.
Yep,
it's on
yes.
the EU peace process, yes. You have talked about the AU mediation, and TPLF has already said that they want to stick to what they call a pre-existing agreement to have talks in Nairobi on the Kenyan presidency's lead. Can you confirm or deny there is a pre-existing agreement on that? And what does the government has to say about going and have negotiations in Kenya?
Okay, thank you. Let me answer your questions the best I can before we proceed. On specificity with regards to who is fueling these divisions, I cannot be that specific. I will leave that to the security sector to define it. But Ethiopians know the specificities. Ethiopians understand that the harmonious fabric with which they have coexisted for years and years are being challenged by external actors colluding with internal actors as well. So there's really no need to further specify that, but the key point to make here is that, again, the fabric of communities living together in harmony is something that has brought Ethiopians together and has sustained that unity for such a long time. So it's important to be cognizant of the fact that there are actors that are trying to foment divisions along ethnic and religious lines to put pressure on the government so as to serve other agendas that they have in the pipeline. I think I'll just leave it as that. With regards to the peace process, I'm not aware of any other pre-existing agreement, as has been said. Nevertheless, Ethiopia firmly is committed to the AU-led peace process. Again, perhaps if this is a reference to the President of Kenya, as well, from the information that I have, he also fully supports the AU-led initiative. He is a friend of Ethiopia. He, like other actors around the region, as well, want peace to prevail in our country and the region. He supports also our principled approach as Ethiopians for African solutions to African problems, particularly in relation to peace and security matters. So this is an important aspect here, and Ethiopia does value that support, but Ethiopia has got a principled focus on the African-led peace process.
Thank you, Villani. Just a follow-up to the previous question. One of the principles you outlined for the peace talks is the role of the African Union as the facilitator of the peace talks. TPLF said it is ready to send a high-level delegation to talks convened and facilitated by the government of Kenya. Is there a difference between these two positions? My second question is, there has not been any detail given by the government regarding casualty figures in regarding the attack in West Wallaga. I was wondering if you could tell us some details. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Skander. I don't want to go in depth into the peace process element of it, because this would be the purview of the high-level committee that has been established and is under the leadership of the Deputy Prime Minister, His Excellency Dammaka Mokonnin. This committee itself has got a spokesperson assigned for that. So once there is further information that needs to be shared publicly, as you understand, the peace process has got sensitivities, this would be subject to their discretion to be providing that. On the second aspect, with regards to details on the casualty figures, there has been a briefing that has been provided this morning by the Government Communication Service. There has been also a briefing that has been provided by the Oromia region as well. The two leaders of the Amhara region and the Oromia regional states also did give a joint statement as it pertains to what had transpired. As it relates to specific figures, the specificity of figures is not something that can be gained right away. So I have a figure right now that has been shared by the regional government. Nevertheless, I also want to counter some of the figures that had been circulating within a day or two after. And it's important to be cognizant of the fact that there are victims and there are families that are affected as a result of that. So unless there are entities who had already pre-planned this, and they were privy to these numbers, it's quite difficult to have shared a number that early on. Nevertheless, per data that I have received from the Oromia region yesterday, the numbers of victims identified so far rests at 338.
Thank you very much. My first question is going to be related to what Skindra has raised. In the past few months, we have seen these repeated violent incidents in various areas, including in Oromia, in Benshangul, in Gambella, and they have been they are compounded with the government's efforts at what it calls a law enforcement operation. So the frequency of these incidents, don't you think they raise questions on the success of the operations, the frequency of these violent incidents? That's my first question. My second question is, we've been hearing reports of clashes along the Sudanese border. So what is the latest there, and are there any efforts to resolve the border disputes there in dialogue? Has there been any practical steps in recent times?
Okay, thank you, Abtamo. On your first question with regard to repeated incidents, if you would recall, the incident a few weeks ago that these perpetrators had tried to implement in Gambella was foiled because, yes, there was attacks, but the magnitude to which they had an ambition in terms of creating chaos was foiled by the efforts of the security sector. For all of the instances in which we're hearing such attacks, we're not also privy to the information shared by or to be shared by the security sector in terms of how many efforts they are making in terms of foiling it. So does it define the success or not? I think success is also defined by the attempts that are being foiled, but which, and maybe this is an encouragement to also the media to ensure that they follow up with security sector in terms of what kind of attacks have been foiled and how strong the security sector has been in ensuring that security in certain pockets is also achieved. But the government cannot work alone to ensure peace and security. It requires the commitment and the consistent support of people. And it also entails abiding by the law itself. So when we're enforcing rule of law operations, there needs to be a support for rule of law operations that are being carried out throughout the country. And this support is really, really key to the success of these efforts. Last time I had shared with you some of the key success factors that had been, key in the Amhara region when the regional government was also undertaking their own rule of law operations. So by that measure, the amount of illegal weapons that had been proliferated, the amount that they were able to seize, these are also telltale signs of how successful these rule of law operations has been. Similarly, the security sector would probably provide a briefing and clarity around that, but over the past week itself, with the operations that had been further intensified following the recent attacks in the Oromia region, the security sector has also managed to seize a lot of illegal weapons from these entities as well. So these are the factors that we need to have a larger perspective when factoring in success or not. As it pertains to the incident with Sudan, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has also exhaustively already relayed, the Ethiopian side on that. Again, the Ethiopian side does regret the loss of life due to the skirmish triggered by a Sudanese army unit. The Ethiopian Defense Force did not involve in the skirmish, and no prisoner of war had been executed. So this allegation that the Ethiopian National Defense Forces were the ones that instigated this skirmish is categorically rejected by the Ethiopian side. The government of Ethiopia remains committed to the principles of amicable resolution and of any differences among states. Particularly, Sudan is very, very close. The people of Sudan are brotherly and sisterly nations, or have got brotherly and sisterly relationships with Ethiopians. Our participation in the peace process within Sudan and the historical ties that have sustained this relationship is not something to be forgotten about. So I don't believe that the skirmish would spoil that factor. And in fact, the Prime Minister's message was also to reiterate the strong ties between these two nations as well. We'll go to the following question. Okay, one last question here and we'll wrap up.
Thank you. I have just one question. There has been efforts undertaking, in terms of relation between Eritrea and Ethiopia. There has been works in terms of trade, tourism, and transport, and but I doubt these things are not going as expected. Is there anything that you could tell me now? What is the present status of the two countries' relation, and especially TPLF has been blaming and labeling Eritrea along with the federal government during the conflict. Is there anything that you could tell us about that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Ethiopia maintains the posture of establishing and maintaining friendly relations with all of the neighbors throughout. Eritrea and Ethiopia have come a long way in terms of the peaceful resolution of 2 decades of conflict as well. So this relationship, I don't know what you mean in terms of is it up to your expectation, but it has its natural progression from a stalemate position to where we have been able to accomplish in terms of cordial relations with the country. So this is something that will be built upon and continue. If there's anything different or specific that you have with regards to that, I would believe that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would be happy to provide that information. Okay. I believe there's no other questions for today, so we'll wrap up. Okay, one more question from Tabitha from Ethiopia.
But what specific mechanisms will the government implement to pursue this peace and solve this impasse?
Okay, so this is something that has been ongoing as well. There is a ministerial committee that has been looking through this at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs level. As I said, there are these skirmishes. These skirmishes have often found, a good cordial way of being dealt with as well. So again, we defer to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to, provide you with specific information in terms of how they're planning on going about it. Thank you very much.